Good morning. Such a bright light. Good morning. My name is Marit van Dijk. As you might be able to tell from my name and my speaking just now, I'm from the Netherlands. Thank you so much for having me here in lovely Zurich. And I'm here today to talk to you about keeping your dependencies in check. We probably all use open source software. When I ask who uses open source software in their work projects or side projects, exactly, all of the hands go up. So, and open source is great because it allows you to use code written by other people that provides you with an application framework, a testing framework, etc., without you having to write that code yourself. But there are also downsides. Any dependency that you use can have vulnerabilities inside. For every declared dependency, you can pull in transitive dependencies, and any of those dependencies can have vulnerabilities. As you might remember in December of 21, when one of my coworkers, who is a Log4j maintainer, had planned to go on holiday, instead got to work 20-hour days for free to fix Log4Shell. And the rest of us, I was at my previous job where we had a lot of microservices, so we got to urgently update them all. Twice, because after the first vulnerability was fixed, additional vulnerabilities were found and also fixed. So we got to redeploy everything again, which gave us good practice for March of 22 when Spring4Shell was found. And we got to do it all again. But we had just gotten all this practice, so at least it was faster this time. Yay. So as we know, there are pros and cons to using external dependencies. And we need to think carefully about whether we want to use particular dependencies or which dependencies we want to use and how to deal with that. I have seen teams who are extremely reluctant to use any external dependencies to the point where they are writing everything themselves. And of course, the upside of that is you're more in control and less likely to get hit by known vulnerabilities. The downside is you have to do everything yourself. On the other hand, I've also seen teams not carefully consider which dependencies to pull in. And then, it might solve your problem right now to pull in another dependency, but that might give you trouble down the line when you have to keep those up to date. So let's discuss some of the things that we want to think about when we add dependencies or when we select dependencies. The first thing to think about is, will this dependency solve my problem, and is the size of the dependency and the impact that it has on my code base relative to the size of the problem that I'm trying to fix here? Do we really need an external dependency? For example, I found Apache Commons string utils in various code bases, and it can be handy, but also, I've seen it used in maximum 3 places, and then especially if you're moving to Kotlin and you can use extension methods, you can then get rid of it. Of course, string utils is small and it's easy to get rid of. Other things to consider is there another dependency that we might already have that does the same thing? If you have Jackson, you don't need JSON or vice versa. We want to consider whether a dependency is well maintained. Does it have a frequency of commits? Does it have new releases coming out? What is the number of active maintainers that is working on this project? Or what is the risk of it becoming unmaintained? There's an XKCD for everything. And this one is particularly true about open source. One thing that's a term that's sometimes used with open source maintainers is called the bus factor, or the number of people that can get hit by a bus before the project gets unmaintained. And I really don't like this expression because I don't want to be thinking about people getting hit by a bus. So I've heard the alternative term that I much prefer, which is called the lottery factor. How many people can win the lottery and never have to code again if they don't want to, but they can move to tropical islands or, given the state of the world and the climate, mountaintops, and never have to code again. So that's something you might want to consider. Another thing to consider is the community. If a project is popular, it means there's a large number of users that might be writing about it, talking about it, that can help you with your problems in support channels. Hopefully some of them will also become committers and maintainers, but as we know, a large user base is not a guarantee for a large number of committers. And another thing to consider is also, is the community welcoming? Are they helpful? How do they respond to questions? In case you have any problems, is there someone you can go to for help? Of course, you might want to consider whether you like using a particular dependency. We all have our personal preferences. I like some projects more than others. But also, consider, is it easy to implement? Is it easy to use? Are there good documentations that is there good documentation that not only explains how to install it, but maybe also how to use it or how not to use it and why? Because often the project itself is best at explaining how it's intended to be used, where random blog posts don't always do that. And like I said, of course, consider whether you like using it, if you have the choice. Consider the impact of adding a dependency to your library. Like I said, string utils, consider whether you really need it, but if you add it, it's also easy to remove because it doesn't impact your entire code base. Unlike, for example, I don't know if you've ever tried to remove Lombok from your project or Reactor. So some of those, much like a dandelion, will spread throughout your code base like this flower throughout my yard, yay. And finally, if you do decide to add a dependency, make sure that you're using the latest stable version and that it doesn't have any known vulnerabilities, because you don't want to increase the attack surface on your application. So where can we go for this information? One place is Maven Central, where we can search for dependencies and find information about them. So how to import it, links to documentation, etc. Also, there's a link to the Sonatype OSS index, which will tell us whether a particular version has no vulnerabilities, yay, with a little emoji, or older versions do have vulnerabilities. So don't use that version, use the newer one. Although Jamie Coleman, who's also speaking today, who works... Jamie, there you are. So Jamie told me yesterday that currently, 29% of the Log4j downloads are still the vulnerable version from Maven Central. So that's scary. A little worrisome. So another place to go for this information is the JetBrains package search website. This information is also integrated into IntelliJ IDEA, as I'll show you later. But if you don't have your IDE just now, you can also go to the package search website and find information about dependencies there. Again, the same information on how to add it to your project, but also links to, for example, tags on Stack Overflow if you want to see what kind of questions are out there, whether people are having trouble that you might expect, links to documentation and source code, etc., and an overview of releases. And finally, you can also go to the actual source code, for example, on GitHub, if that's where it's hosted, and look at the source code itself, look at the project, look at any open issues, but also look at how they interact with the community. How do they respond to issues? How do they handle pull requests? And look at the insights for the pulse of the project, so the activity, how active committers and maintainers are on the project, or the number of commits over time and who does those commits. So Hopefully we take this information into account, especially when selecting new dependencies or when re-evaluating the ones that we have. But since we all raised our hand on, we all use open source dependencies, we will have to maintain the dependencies that we have. Now, it used to be that I would check out a project, one of the microservices that my team was working on, and I would check which dependencies there are. We can use Maven to get the dependency, and Gradle I'll show you in a few slides. And I could ask Maven, are there any dependency updates that I can do for this project? I would usually do this after doing whatever the reason was that I checked out that project. So, you know, fixing a bug or adding a feature, and then just do a bit of cleaning up and upgrading afterwards. Maven also has the option to analyze dependencies and to look for example, unused declared dependencies. The project I'm using here is an old project from my GitHub graveyard that I built several years ago and haven't updated at all or used for anything else, but it's the perfect example of outdated dependencies. So don't throw away your graveyard of GitHub projects. They might come in handy someday. So also here we see that there's a JUnit dependency that is declared but not used. In this case, I wouldn't recommend removing it. I'd recommend adding some tests, but that's a different rant. Gradle, you can also ask for the dependency tree to see which dependencies you have and which transitive dependencies they bring in. If you want to see which or whether there are version updates, you can use a plugin like the benmains version plugin to ask for, are there updates to the dependencies I'm using? And I just asked the Gradle guys downstairs whether Gradle has a way to analyze dependencies as well. And there's a Nebula lint plugin that you can use to ask for unused dependencies. But I haven't had time between then and now to add that to my slide deck. There are several ways in IntelliJ IDEA that you can see which dependencies you use. Obviously in your POM.xml or your build Gradle. You can see all of them in the external dependencies in the project pane on the left. We can see them again in the Maven or Gradle tool window, where we can also collapse and expand the ones that we are interested in, which is a lot easier than tracing the lines in the dependency tree. So that's the Gradle build menu. And we can open the dependency analyzer, where we can again see the resolved dependencies and their usages, so where we're getting them from. That works with Maven and it works with Gradle too. And here we can also say, show me the ones that have conflicts. So if you're trying to resolve conflicts, you can find them here and then resolve them. We can use a package search, the website that I showed you earlier, from inside IntelliJ IDEA, so we can add dependencies, and this is what that looks like. Oh, wait. And I have no idea. Oh, yeah, here, it's going. So you can add them from right there using code completion, so you can stay in the flow of working on your project without having to go on the internet and get distracted by other things. We can update them right inside IntelliJ IDEA. If you're using Community Edition, you'll get the little squiggly lines telling you there's an update available, and you can use either context action, so Alt-Enter or Option-Enter, for suggestions, or if you hover over it, it will tell you that there's an update available if there is. So here's what that looks like. This is the context action to update it. And then it should do the hover. There you go. So you can update them right inside your POM.xml or build Gradle. It works with the build Gradle too. Alternatively, you have the dependencies tool window that you can use, where it will also tell you this is still my very outdated project that is not running on production anywhere, don't worry. You can see which versions can be updated. And we can search here for new dependencies as well. And you can update them either to a new version, but it doesn't have to be the latest. You can upgrade them individually, or you can upgrade all dependencies. If you are using IntelliJ Ultimate and you import or you have outdated dependencies or vulnerable dependencies, it will highlight them in bright yellow. And if you hover over them, it will provide you with information of the known vulnerabilities that are in there, with links to click if you want more information on the CVEs. But also you can see this information again right inside your IDE in the vulnerable dependencies window. It will tell you what the severity is of those vulnerabilities, and when you select one, it will give you the information about those CVEs right inside your IDE. So again, you can stay inside your IDE working on your project. You don't have to go to the internet and get distracted by stuff. Of course, the downsides of all of the ways that I've showed you so far is that you have to have the project checked out on your machine in order to go check for updates. Now, if you work in a microservices landscape and your team is responsible for 5+ microservices, you might not want to go and check those out all the time. Also, in the case of the teams that I worked on before, we would have some applications that we worked on a lot and some that maybe we touched once every month or every few months. So hopefully your company will have some kind of software composition analysis tool that will scan all of the repositories and tell you which ones have vulnerabilities inside. There are a lot of options for this, and as developers, unfortunately, we don't always have control of which ones the company will use, so I'm not going to go into all of them. But if your company is not using anything like this, then talk to your security department and ask about it. The upside here is that you don't have to go and check out all of your individual repositories, but the downside is you do still have to check the dashboard. In one of the teams I was on, we would have a recurring task to check it every once in a while and then plan accordingly for updates. And then, of course, you have to apply those updates, verify the build still builds, it doesn't have any unintended side effects, etc. So this is where bots can come in handy. For Java, we have 3 options. We have Dependabot on GitHub, Renovate, and Sneak Open Source. And I've looked at all 3 so that I can give you an overview. I added them all to my personal GitHub profile, but they do work with other platforms as well, or most of them. So Dependabot is GitHub native. They acquired it in 2019. And it has the features that it can give you alerts on your repositories. It can do security updates, and with a little more configuration, also version updates for outdated dependencies that are have a newer version, but not for security reasons. Since it's GitHub native, it's really easy to, I should never say really easy. It's extremely straightforward to add it to your GitHub profile. You can do so via the settings and then the code security and analysis to enable the alerts and security updates. Alerts will look like this on your own projects. If there are outdated dependencies, you'll get a yellow alert, and you can click the button to see more details on those vulnerabilities. And if you enable the security updates, Dependabot will start creating automatic PRs for you. They used to have really basic information in there, but it's much improved recently. So they have some information there on why they're providing this update and what they're updating. If you want to have version updates as well, you need to add a Dependabot YAML file where you specify the package manager and the location of the manifest file, so the POM XML or build Gradle. You can schedule you need to provide the schedule interval of daily, weekly, or monthly. And you can optionally also configure the maximum number of PRs, which is a default of 5. If you don't want to get spammed by too many PRs if you're a little bit behind on your updating. And you can also define a rebase strategy, so whether or not it should automatically rebase the PRs, which might matter in terms of costs or run cycles that you have on your CI system. And there's a little bit more that you can provide. The next option is Renovate. This is available on GitHub via an app, but there are other ways to run it if you're on a different platform. It offers, again, security updates and version updates and a limited project dashboard that will list all of the updates that you need for your project. So to enable this on your GitHub profile, you can go to the app, where it will give you the option to apply it to all repositories, or if you just want to try it out, if you haven't used anything like this, to a single selected repository. And Renovate is the only one that gives you that option straight away, if you just want to try it out. It will then create an onboarding PR, which will add the basic configuration to your project. And once that is merged, it will start doing its thing. So you have the option to enable that for all of your repositories or selected repositories only. The basic configuration file is created for you in the onboarding PR. You can provide it with scheduling. You can set the maximum number of PRs, but also a maximum number of concurrent branches if you want to make sure to not get overwhelmed with too many PRs. You can also set rules for auto-merging. So for any updates that you would merge without even looking at them, you can tell Renovate to just merge those. I don't know if that's smart always, but they do have that option. And the configuration options that Renovate offers there are more options, and the options are more detailed than Dependable's options. This is what a Renovate PR looks like. They also provide information on the age of the new package, the adoption rate, how many people have already upgraded, the passing tests for people who are using Renovate on their projects for this version, and then the confidence level that Renovate determined where if it says neutral, they either don't have enough information or can't determine on the information that they have to tell you whether they're confident you can use it. They'll add a dashboard to your project with everything that needs to be updated, which for this project is basically everything. And they have a dashboard, if you have it activated, which will show you the jobs that they've run, and you can click for more details. So the last option is Snyk Open Source, which is available via Snyk. They also offer security updates and version updates. But in addition to that, they offer the option to test for vulnerabilities on incoming PRs, which the other two don't have, which can be useful because then you know that a PR doesn't add vulnerable dependencies in between scans. They also have the option to test for vulnerabilities in the source code. Of course, that's a different kind of functionality, and there are other tools that can do that too. And they provide dashboards, much like a software composition analysis tool that you might have of which vulnerabilities or how many of which severity are found in different projects. To enable Snyk, you can do this via their website. You'll need to authorize Snyk for your profile. Select repository access. Here they have the option either for public repositories or your public and private repositories. You need a personal access token, and then it will start creating PRs for you. They also provide some information on why they are suggesting an update and more details about that. What Snyk does by default, and the other two don't, but Renovate can be configured to do this, is they will bundle related updates so that you don't get spammed by quite so many PRs, which is nice. And like I said, they have a check on incoming PRs for vulnerabilities and a much prettier dashboard than the other two. The configuration options are slightly more limited. You can set the frequency. You can enable and disable whether to check for already known vulnerabilities or only for newly disclosed vulnerabilities, so that you could separately get rid of your backlog of known vulnerabilities while making sure that you're not getting any new ones, or do one or the other. And you can enable or disable it for specific projects. So you can make it so that it works only on one project, but it's not an easy option right at the start. So what are pros and cons of bots? They're fairly straightforward to install. Of course, this might vary on the platform that you're using. But we used, at my last job, we used Renovate on GitLab, and someone had documented exactly how to apply that to all of our repositories. So I did that, and it was way less work than running Maven updates on every project every time. It creates automatic PRs. You can see whether the build passes or fails. If it fails, you know that you'll have additional work to do there. If it passes, you might be able to merge it, but that also, of course, depends on how confident you are in your test suite. And you still do have to manage all of those PRs and figure out when to merge and deploy them. And if the build fails or you need any changes to your code, these bots cannot do that for you. This is where migration tools can come in handy. And I will show you several options. Because I work for JetBrains, I have to show you the IntelliJ IDEA migration refactoring option that we have. We have several pre-baked options in here, Java EE to Jakarta EE, JUnit 425, and JavaFX. But you can also create your own migrations. What the migrations look like is they will replace the old package names with the new package names. And I wish I'd known about this when I was updating JUnit 425, because I did that manually. Silly me, I should have known there was an option. So if you want to know more about that, we have videos on our IntelliJ IDEA YouTube channel about migrating JavaX to Jakarta and JUnit 425. Another option to migrate your code is error-prone, which technically isn't intended as a migration tool. It's a static analysis tool for Java that can catch common programming mistakes at compile time. You can use it with Maven or Gradle, and there are several other options. They have an IntelliJ IDEA and Eclipse plugin, and you can use it from the command line. They have, I think, over 250 bug patterns already defined that they can find in your code. And you can set it to either report on those patterns or to fix them for you. But you can also create custom checks, because it includes Refaster, which is a way to refactor code using before and after templates. There's another Dutch speaker, Sander Mak, who works at Picnic in the Netherlands. They use error-prone extensively. He talks about it as well at several conferences. And he has said that they have used it also to upgrade from Java versions. So take a look at one of his talks if you want to know more about error-prone. The last option I want to show you is OpenRewrite. OpenRewrite is an open source source code refactoring that can help you with framework migrations, vulnerability patches, and API migrations. They started with an early focus on Java, but they're also adding Kotlin support at the moment. They have some Groovy support, which is focused on dependency manipulation, but also works with most Groovy source code. They're working on Python, which is either there's a release, it was just released, or it should be released soon, and they're looking to add additional languages in the future. And OpenRewrite can do code migrations for you. They have a bunch of popular recipes, not only to migrate, for example, from JUnit 4 to 5 or Spring Boot versions. They also have static analysis issue remediation, so they can fix security bugs in your code and help you with your sonar metrics that way. And they can fix check style violations so that you don't have to worry about the style of your code in your team yourself. They have a recipe catalog. Some of the recipes are included in OpenRewrite itself. Some are maintained, for example, by Spring. And you can author your own recipes if you have particular migrations that you need in your code base. They have a quick start on the website. You can add it to your POM XML or build Gradle and configure which recipes to use. And then when you run it, it will make the changes to your code that you can look at either in a Git diff or your commit tool window to check whether you want all of those changes. They have the option to combine recipes. So for example, the Spring Boot 2 JUnit 4 to 5, which combines Spring updates and JUnit updates. And you can also run it from the command line so that you don't have to change your build file, but you can just apply it from the command line. And if you want to know more about OpenRewrite, Tim de Beek from Modern is here, and he's speaking later today about OpenRewrite. We sometimes speak at the same conferences, so I always get to be his support act and be like, go see Tim. But seriously, go see Tim, because I'm really excited about this tool. I am a little bit sad that I don't have any production code bases that I can actually try this on. So if you do, please give it a try and report back. So in conclusion, I hope that you evaluate your dependencies carefully and sometimes also re-evaluate whether you still want to use them, that you automate checks and updates as much as possible so that you don't have to waste your time doing that, but you can focus on interesting stuff, and that you stay safe. If you want to find the slides, I haven't updated today's slides yet, but you can find previous versions of this talk also on my website. Thank you. If anybody has any questions or would like stickers or other swag, come see me.